Winter had arrived with its quiet charm, and the pre-Christmas season was in full swing. Our home was draped in soft lights, the aroma of cinnamon and freshly baked cookies weaving through the air. My son Ethan had always loved this time of year, and as I watched him now, hunched over the coffee table with a sketchpad in hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and warmth. Ethan had a gift, an extraordinary talent for drawing that left anyone who saw his work in awe. At just 16, his sketches captured emotions so vividly they seemed alive. Today, he was immersed in creating a piece for his school's Christmas art showcase, the pencil moving swiftly across the page with a precision that belied his age. "Mom," he called, not looking up. "What do you think of this?" I set down the basket of ornaments I had been unpacking and moved closer. The image he had been working on was breathtaking. A quaint winter village scene. Cozy cottages dusted with snow, children playing on frozen ponds, and an old man selling roasted chestnuts under a lamppost. It was the kind of scene that instantly transported you to a simpler, more magical time. "It's beautiful," I whispered, genuinely awestruck. "You have such a way of capturing life, Ethan. I can almost hear the crunch of snow under their boots." He grinned, brushing back a lock of his dark hair. "Do you think it's good enough for the competition?" "Good enough," I laughed. "It's more than good enough. It's incredible." For a moment, his confidence seemed to swell, but then he hesitated, his gaze dropping back to the sketch. "Sometimes I feel like no one at school really gets it. They see my drawings, but they don't see me." My heart ached hearing those words. Ethan had always been introspective, often lost in his art, and though his talent set him apart, it also isolated him. I reached out, brushing his shoulder gently. "Your art is a part of you, Ethan. And anyone who takes the time to see it is seeing the best parts of who you are." He nodded, but I could tell my words didn't fully ease his worries. As the evening wore on, we worked together to decorate the living room. Ethan took charge of arranging the ornaments on the tree, his sharp eye for detail ensuring every bauble found its perfect place. I couldn't help but steal glances at him, marveling at the young man he was becoming. His focus, his dedication, it all reminded me so much of his father. Ethan didn't talk much about his dad these days, though his absence was a quiet undercurrent in our lives. But tonight, as we stood back to admire the glowing tree, I saw a flicker of that connection in his expression. "Your dad would have loved this," I said softly. "You know how much he enjoyed this time of year." Ethan nodded, his voice steady but distant. "Yeah, I think about that a lot." We sat together by the fire that night, his sketchbook open between us. He'd started working on another piece, a pair of mittens loosely sketched, hanging from a hook by a fireplace. It was simple, yet there was something deeply comforting about it. "I want to dedicate this one to him," Ethan said after a while, his tone thoughtful. "For the showcase. He always said my art would take me places." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I managed to smile. "He'd be so proud of you, Ethan. Just like I am." The next morning, as snow began to fall in soft, silent flurries, Ethan brought his finished sketch to me. This one was different, more intimate. It was of us, sitting together by the fire, my arm around him as he worked on his art. It was so lifelike, so filled with emotion that it brought tears to my eyes. "This one's for you," he said quietly. "Because you're always here. You always believe in me." I pulled him into a tight hug, feeling the weight of his words. In that moment, amidst the twinkling lights and the gentle snowfall, I realized that our little family, though unconventional, was filled with a love that no sketch or painting could ever fully capture. The snow blanketed our world in serene quietness, insulating us from the chaos of the outside. Life inside our little house, however, felt anything but quiet. Ethan and I had settled into a routine during his school break, one filled with shared laughter, creative sparks, and lingering moments that felt increasingly profound. Ethan had finished his sketch for the Christmas showcase, but he kept drawing, filling page after page with ideas. Each one seemed more personal than the last. There was an intimacy in his work now, a depth that mirrored the way our connection seemed to be evolving. I couldn't ignore the subtle changes in his demeanor either. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a steadiness that made him seem older than his 16 years. One snowy evening, I stood by the window, staring out at the frozen world beyond. The soft glow of the Christmas lights reflected off the glass, casting a warm halo around the room. I felt Ethan's presence before I heard him, his quiet steps padding up behind me. "You've been standing here for a while," he said softly. His voice had a gentleness that always put me at ease, but tonight it carried a weight I couldn't quite place. I turned, meeting his gaze. "Just admiring the snow. It's beautiful, don't you think?" "It is," he replied, though his eyes weren't on the snow. They were on me. The way he looked at me sent a shiver down my spine, not from discomfort, but from an awareness I wasn't ready to confront. His gaze was steady, intent, and for the first time I saw him not just as my son, but as someone who carried an emotional gravity far beyond his years. He stepped closer, and I felt the heat radiating from him. "You've been working so hard to make everything perfect for Christmas," he said. "You always do so much for me, Mom." His words struck a chord deep within me. I reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, a gesture so natural yet suddenly charged with something unspoken. "It's what mothers do, Ethan," I said softly, though even as the words left my lips, they felt inadequate. He leaned down slightly, closing the space between us. "It's more than that," he murmured. "You're more than that." I froze, unsure of how to respond. The air between us felt thick, heavy with something neither of us could name. His hand came up, brushing against my arm in a gesture that was both comforting and electrifying. "I think we should get to bed," I said quickly, breaking the moment before it could spiral into something I couldn't control. Ethan stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Good night, Mom," he said, his voice softer now, almost regretful. I went to my room, closing the door behind me and leaning against it as my heart raced. The house was silent, but my mind was anything but. I replayed the moment over and over, analyzing every word, every glance, every touch. What was happening? What was I feeling? And, more importantly, what was Ethan feeling? The next morning, the tension seemed to have dissipated, but only on the surface. Ethan was his usual cheerful self, helping me shovel the snow from the driveway and teasing me about my less-than-perfect technique. I laughed along with him, grateful for the normalcy, but I couldn't shake the memory of the night before. As the days passed, Ethan's behavior continued to evolve. He was more attentive, more protective, stepping in to help with tasks before I even had to ask. He complimented me in ways that felt more like admiration than mere gratitude, his words lingering in my mind long after he said them. One evening we were decorating the final touches on the Christmas tree. Ethan had climbed a small ladder to place the star at the top, his strong hands adjusting it just so. As he stepped down, he looked at me, his face illuminated by the warm glow of the lights. "You're beautiful," he said suddenly, the words slipping out as if he couldn't hold them back. I blinked, caught completely off guard. "Ethan," I began, but he cut me off. "No, I mean it," he said, his voice firm but tender. "You're the most beautiful person I know. Inside and out." I didn't know what to say. My heart swelled with a mixture of pride, confusion, and something else, something I couldn't name but felt deeply. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "I don't just mean it as your son," he said, his voice dropping to a softer, almost vulnerable tone. "I mean it as a man." My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to shrink around us, the glow of the Christmas lights casting long shadows on the walls. I wanted to say something to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. "Ethan," I finally said, my voice trembling. "You're young. You're still figuring out your feelings." He shook his head. "This isn't something I'm figuring out," he said firmly. "I know how I feel. He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I just want you to know how much you mean to me." Tears welled up in my eyes and I reached out, pulling him into a hug. You mean everything to me, Ethan, I whispered, my voice breaking. But we have to be careful. We can't. I know, he said quickly, his arms tightening around me. I wanted you to know. We stayed like that for a long moment, the world outside forgotten as we navigated the uncharted territory of our emotions. When we finally pulled apart, there was a mutual understanding in our eyes. A silent agreement to tread carefully, to honor the bond we shared without crossing lines we couldn't uncross. As the snow continued to fall outside, I realized that this winter would be one of profound change, not just for Ethan but for both of us. Our relationship was shifting, evolving into something neither of us had anticipated. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: we would face it together. Christmas Eve arrived, and the house glowed with a warm, festive light. The tree stood tall in the corner of the living room, adorned with baubles and garlands that caught the firelight and reflected it in tiny, shimmering bursts. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air, mingling with the quiet hum of holiday music. It was the kind of cozy perfection that should have brought nothing but joy, yet beneath the surface, I felt a quiet undercurrent of tension, a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Ethan had been uncharacteristically reserved all day, a subtle shift that I couldn't quite place. He'd spent most of the afternoon in his room, and when I asked if everything was all right, he only smiled and said, "You'll see." His words stayed with me, a small knot of curiosity tightening in my chest. That evening we exchanged gifts by the fire. Ethan had insisted I open his last, so I handed him his present, a new set of graphite pencils and sketchbooks, supplies he always ran through too quickly. He grinned as he unwrapped it, his eyes lighting up in a way that warmed me to my core. "This is perfect, Mom," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Thank you." When it was my turn, he handed me a large, flat package wrapped in deep red paper. His hands lingered on it as he passed it to me, and I noticed the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, as though he were nervous about my reaction. "Go on," he urged, his voice quiet but insistent. I tore the paper carefully, revealing a canvas beneath. As I peeled away the last layer, my breath caught in my throat. The painting was stunning, an ethereal depiction of a female silhouette, her form suggested by the interplay of light and shadow. The lines were delicate, the curves subtle, but there was no mistaking the intimacy in the way he had rendered her. Her figure was graceful, poised in a way that radiated quiet strength. The muted tones of the background made the figure seem almost luminous, drawing the eye and evoking a sense of reverence. For a moment I couldn't speak. The air felt charged, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. "It's beautiful," I finally managed, my voice thick with emotion. "Ethan, this is incredible." He shifted slightly, his fingers lacing together in his lap. "Do you recognize her?" My eyes darted back to the painting, and it hit me like a bolt of lightning. The slope of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, the gentle curve of the waist. It was me. Or at least his interpretation of me. "It's me," I whispered, my hand trembling slightly as I traced the edge of the canvas. He nodded, his gaze steady. "I wanted to capture the way I see you. Strong, beautiful, kind. Someone who's always been there for me, even when I didn't realize how much I needed it." Tears welled up in my eyes, threatening to spill over. "Ethan, I don't know what to say. It's the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me." He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "You've always inspired me, Mom. Not just as an artist but as a person. I wanted you to see yourself the way I see you." My heart swelled with a mix of pride, love, and something deeper, something that had been quietly building between us over the past few weeks. His words were laden with a tenderness that transcended the usual bond between mother and son. I felt the weight of his gaze on me, the intensity in his eyes that I'd tried so hard to ignore. I set the painting aside carefully, then turned to him. "Ethan," I began, my voice soft but firm. It's so much more than I ever expected. But I need to ask you, are you sure this is how you feel?" He didn't hesitate. I've never been more sure of anything." His words hung in the air, the finality of them sinking into my chest like a stone. I searched his face for any sign of doubt, but all I saw was sincerity, a conviction that both comforted and terrified me. "Ethan, I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice trembling. "This is new territory for both of us." He reached out, taking my hand gently in his. "I'm not asking for anything, Mom. I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me. And to give you something that reflects that." The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized how tightly I was clutching his hand. My heart raced, caught between the undeniable love I felt for him and the fear of crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "We need to be careful," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Whatever this is, it's complicated." He nodded slowly, his thumb brushing against the back of my hand in a gesture that was both soothing and electric. "No. And I'm willing to take things one step at a time. I just need you to know how I feel." I squeezed his hand, my emotions swirling in a chaotic mix of love, fear, and hope. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything. You've given me so much more than I deserve." "You deserve the world," he said simply, his voice steady and filled with a quiet certainty that left me breathless. We sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling softly in the background as the snow fell silently outside. In that moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us, bound by an unspoken connection that defied definition. As Christmas Eve melted into Christmas morning, I knew that our relationship had changed forever. And while the path ahead was uncertain, I couldn't deny the profound closeness we now shared, a bond that felt as fragile as it was unbreakable. The week after Christmas passed in a blur of anticipation. Ethan had submitted his painting to the competition at my insistence. Though he hesitated at first, unsure if something so personal would resonate with the judges, I reminded him that true art was about connection and vulnerability. "You poured your heart into that piece, Ethan," I told him as we packed the canvas carefully for delivery. "Let them see what I see." His gaze softened at my words, and he nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "I hope they understand it the way you do," he said quietly. The day of the winner announcement arrived with little fanfare. Snow continued to fall softly outside, blanketing the world in a quiet stillness that seemed to mirror our home. Ethan paced the living room like a caged lion, his phone clutched tightly in his hand as we waited for the call. "You're going to wear a hole in the carpet," I teased, though my own nerves were barely under control. He gave a half-hearted chuckle, running a hand through his hair. "What if they didn't like it?" he said, his voice edged with doubt. "What if it wasn't good enough?" I crossed the room and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, you created something incredible. Whether you win or not doesn't change that." Just as the words left my mouth, his phone buzzed, breaking the tension like a thunderclap. His eyes widened, and he fumbled with the device before answering, his voice trembling slightly. "This is Ethan Miller," he said, his tone hesitant. I stood frozen, watching his face as he listened to the voice on the other end. At first, his expression was unreadable, but then his eyes lit up with a joy so pure it was almost overwhelming. He broke into a grin, his cheeks flushing with excitement as he stammered out a heartfelt, "Thank you. Thank you so much." When he hung up, he turned to me, his voice barely containing his elation. "Mom, I won," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I won." The air seemed to leave the room as I processed his words. "You what?" I managed, my heart racing. "I won the competition," he exclaimed, sweeping me into a tight hug that lifted me off my feet. $10,000, Mom. Can you believe it?" Laughter bubbled out of me, tears welling in my eyes as I hugged him back. "I knew it," I whispered, my voice trembling with pride. "I knew you could do it." The following week was a whirlwind. The competition organizers invited Ethan to an awards ceremony in the city, where his painting would be displayed alongside the other finalists. He wore his best suit that evening, looking every inch the young man he was becoming, his confidence radiating as we entered the gallery together. The room was filled with murmurs of admiration as attendees stopped to admire his work. I stood off to the side, watching as he spoke with the judges and other artists, his face glowing with pride. It was a side of him I hadn't seen before, poised, self-assured, and so much more than the boy I'd raised. When the ceremony ended and we returned home, Ethan was practically buzzing with excitement. But it wasn't until the next morning that he truly left me speechless. He handed me a small, neatly wrapped box over breakfast, his grin mischievous. "Open it," he urged. "Ethan, you already gave me the most amazing gift with that painting," I said, though I couldn't hide my curiosity. "Just open it, Mom," he insisted, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. I carefully removed the ribbon and paper, revealing a jewelry box inside. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Nestled within was a delicate bracelet, its silver chain adorned with tiny charms, a palette, a paintbrush, and a small, shimmering heart. "It's beautiful," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Ethan, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted, his tone earnest. "You've always believed in me, Mom. This competition, the painting. I couldn't have done any of it without you. This is my way of saying thank you." Tears blurred my vision as I looked at him, overcome by the depth of his thoughtfulness. "Ethan, this is the most incredible gift I've ever received," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said softly. And then, before I could say more, he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek. The warmth of his lips lingered long after he pulled away, leaving me momentarily breathless. The gesture, though innocent, carried a tenderness that made my heart ache with both pride and a deep, unspoken emotion that I couldn't name. "Thank you," I whispered, placing my hand on his cheek. "For everything." The rest of the day passed in a haze of contentment. Ethan spent hours sketching in his room while I worked on organizing the house, but the bracelet on my wrist was a constant reminder of the bond we shared, a connection that had grown deeper and more profound with every passing day. As the sun set and the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I found myself sitting by the fire, the warmth of the flames mirrored by the warmth in my chest. Ethan joined me, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa, and we sat together in comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between us more powerful than any words. "Mom," he said after a while, his voice soft. "I know I've said it before, but I want you to know how much you mean to me. You're not just my mom. You're my inspiration." I looked at him, my heart swelling with an emotion too vast to contain. "And you're mine," I replied, my voice thick with sincerity. We stayed there for hours, the fire crackling softly as the snow fell outside, and I realized that this Christmas had given me more than I ever could have asked for. Ethan wasn't just growing into an extraordinary artist. He was becoming an extraordinary man, a man I was proud to call my son, my confidant, and my closest friend.